In Spacecorp, each player controls an Earth-based enterprise driving the expansion of humanity into the solar system and beyond. Players compete to conduct missions of exploration, construction, and settlement, seeking wealth through discovery, resource production, technological development, and establishment of settlements.
All right, so Spacecorp. Players are going to explore and develop outer space over the course of 3 eras, approximating 300 years of human expansion into the cosmos. Each era covers a different scale of space exploration, with Era 1 having the players explore and develop as far out as Mars. Then Era 2 seeing the players settling the solar system. And finally, in Era 3, sending missions into interstellar space, hopefully establishing colonies. Thank you for that, Greg. Through the play of cards from their hands, as well as building their tableaus, to being able to carry out a multitude of various actions, including exploring celestial bodies, building bases, producing resources, and eventually building colonies, players try to earn the most profit. Whichever player earns the most profit at the end of the 3rd era wins the game. All right, so let's go over how to play Era 1 Mariners. So what are you guys looking at first and foremost? So over on the left-hand side there, we have the business display. So the business display, it has the profit marker track, which is also victory point track around the outside of the track. Everyone starts at 0, except for the 4th player who will start at 1, but we'll get to that. Then there are 7 contract tracks. Those are common goals that reward the first player to complete the contract. Each column is for a different era, Era 1, Era 2, and Era 3, and these will not reset between eras. Then the main board that you guys are looking at, the Mariners, all right? So I think we're going to go ahead and try and zoom in just a hair on this. That'll do a pretty good job of getting what we need here. So it's divided into various regions by white lines. So for instance, we have one region right here, another region down here. We have another one where Mars is, another where Halley's Comet is, etc., etc. Most regions have sites on them that are designated with a B letter on them. So even though there is no landing location per se, this being a Lagrange point, there is still a different site here designated by this B on it. They may also have larger square spaces for exploration tiles or discovery tiles, as you can see here. These have various E designations of either E1 or E2, as you can see. At the top right-hand corner, we have the asteroid belt up there. The asteroid belt, there's also the first beyond and the second beyond markers. These are going to convey a benefit to the next in the next era to the player who acquires one, be it the first or second beyond. Then, of course, we have Earth right here. Each player has 2 teams or 2 cubes. So for now, they will be referenced as teams that start on their respective bases, printed on the board, as you can see there. On the left-hand side, there is a card offer or card display over here. There are 4 cards from which to draw from, or if you choose Mystery Meat off the top of the deck, you can also do so. Then there is the exploration tile draw piles. So we have the draw pile for the E1s and the draw pile for the E2s here in Era 1. Then in the bottom right here, there is a distance chart for moving from Earth to various other sites around the board. Just a quick little handy-dandy reference. Now, there are other boxes down here in the bottom left-hand corner. These pertain to solo play, and we're not going to be covering that at all today. Off-board, pretty simple. We have the draw deck. All right, easy enough. But then there's the player tableaus, and I'm going to go ahead and zoom this back out just a hair. There we go. So over on the player tableaus, everyone starts with a player board. There are 3 symbols to show that we're playing the game, the boards for the full game here. There are infra card slots. Players can add to these to strengthen various actions. There's a turn summary chart right here. Then there are the player pieces. There are various types of bases, these round discs here. And then there are 2 extra teams that won't come into play until later in the game. two progress cubes. There is a tan genetics cube and a black revelation cube. These have no direct use in the game in Era 1, but they're going to have a significant impact in future eras, and you will be able to advance the tan one even if it doesn't directly benefit you in Era 1, so keep that in mind. And then there is the starting hand of cards. Everyone starts with one chemical drive in their hand and one time card. So before I go any further, I want to go ahead and briefly go over what the cards are. So anytime you see a big symbol in the middle with a word and a number on it, be it move one or be it something like this, move one or build one, those are the available actions that you may take in a given turn. Okay, notice the or, you're able to take one action. More on that here in a little bit. A card may also say that it may upgrade as infra. That's going to pertain to being able to play in as an upgrade action over here into your tableau. Also, there are some symbology down here in the bottom left-hand corner. So the dark outline, as you see here, this shows that it is a starter card for the various deck that we're playing. And you'll notice that these, as we go through the deck, do not have that. Those are just the regular cards within the deck, the moon being the Mariner phase or the Mariner era. Anything else that's down here at the bottom or in the bottom right, these have to do with the solo game and won't be coming into play for our game tonight as well. And briefly, I want to go over the time cards. It may not make a whole lot of sense yet, but this is the only time in which I'm going to cover the time cards. Whenever taking one of those three listed actions, a move, an explore, or a build action, you have two choices as it says. You may double the action's value, so for instance going from a move 1 to a move 2, or use the total value twice, once for each of two teams, because remember, everybody starts with two teams out here on the board, so you may be able to split a move. So if you had a total move of 2, you then, instead of doubling it to 4, you could then do a move of 2 with one team and a move of 2 potentially with another team. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Any questions about the cards in general and just the layout of the cards?
Nope.
Okay. All right, cool. All right, so Spacecorp is played over an indeterminate number of rounds where the goal of the game is profit, i.e. victory points. The end of Era 1 is triggered when one of two things happen. 6 of the 7 contracts for the era have been completed, or when the draw deck is empty. Before those things happen, however, players are going to take their turns in clockwise order, starting with the first player, i.e. the active player. They complete their entire turn before moving on to the next player. The flow of a turn is mostly consistent from era to era, with some exceptions, so we're going to be going over the basic flow of a turn in Era 1, and then in subsequent eras, point out the differences. So each of the player turns follows the same set of steps, and basically it is this. So you'll notice on 0 it says Starfarers only. Well, we're playing Mariners right now, so that doesn't apply. So we're going to skip it. Step 1 says conduct an action. Step 2, claim contracts. Step 3 is opponents can claim rewards, i.e. possibly draw a card. Step 4 says perform a free team transport. Step 5 is discard any played cards and replenish the card offer. And step 6 is draw a card if you have 4 or less in hand. So the majority of this is all going to take place in turn 1, or in step number 1, which is conduct an action. That is the meat of the game. So that said, let's go ahead and start with that. Conducting an action. Each turn starts off with the meat of the game, as I said. So there are 8 available actions on a given turn in the first era. And all of those actions are actually listed, and I'm going to move the draw deck for right now. They're all listed on the player aid over here on the right-hand side. I'm going to leave that up here for right now, even though I realize you guys can't read it, just so you can follow along. The active player announces which action they are going to conduct on their turn, be it research, move, explore, build, produce, genetics, skipping revelation, because that doesn't come into play in Era 1, upgrade, or special, and again, skipping established colony, that won't come into play until Era 3, all right? Before we get into each action, there are some basic general ideas that you need to understand. When you take many of the actions, players have to determine the value or the power of a given action on their turn that they're going to be taking. The higher the number, the stronger the action will be. The base value of an action is 0 and can be boosted by any number of various things. Playing one or more cards from their hand, showing the action they've chosen and the value. So for instance, if I play this 1 move, and I play this card for a total of 2 move. In addition to that, you can use your infra or possibly another player's infra, okay? So for a total of move of 1, 2, now a move of 3. If you have any bases that are already built out on the board, they may convey a benefit that boosts various things. For instance, the Spaceport adds a move of +2, okay? There are also progress cards and the ability to spend profit or victory points. Those also are later in the game. Also, the math in this game is done a little bit backwards than what we've been taught in school. Addition and subtraction happens before multiplication. That is really, really important to understand, okay? Because we're going to be, when we move, early on in the game, things are relatively close. As the game goes further, they get further and further apart, so it's going to take significantly larger jumps or moves, okay? So those two things out of the way, let's go ahead and go through what the different actions are, starting with research. So research is the ability to draw cards. So you're going to draw cards based on the equal value of your research action. Well, everybody starts with a research action of 2. And you'll notice that it shows infra slot 1, 2, and 3. You may never cover research 2, okay? So the base value of whenever you take a research action has a research value of 2. So you must have 7 or fewer cards in your hand prior to the action, and there is no hand limit. So if I have a research of 2 and I have 6 cards in my hand, I can draw 2 cards. Where I draw those cards from are from either the mystery meat off the top of the deck or out here from the card offer, any mix that I wish to do. And again, the research value is the number of cards that I can draw. So even though when I drew the cards I only had 6, now I have 8. If I still have 8 when I want to take a research action, I cannot on subsequent turns. So research, that's pretty simple, easy enough. So there's research action. Now we move into the move action. This one's kind of wordy and kind of weighty, so bear with me on this one. This allows the active player to move one team from its current location or current site to another site. Movement must always be site to site, and it cannot end floating in space. Okay? The move value must meet or exceed the total distance that you wish to travel. All movement must begin or end at a player's base. So we're all starting at bases, so even though we don't have any bases out here, that's okay. Meaning when we leave, though, for us to be able to move that team again, we're going to have a base built at that site. As I said, each player starts with a base on Earth. Now, how do you calculate your movement costs? Well, here we go. Lifting off is 1 movement. Crossing region borders is whatever that number is. So you'll see these, where I mentioned these were various regions out here. Crossing these borders, wherever you're crossing, adds to that movement level. So lifting off and these region borders are going to cost. So this would cost 1, this would cost 3. Landing also costs 1 movement. And I want to make a point here. Lagrange points technically are not actual physical locations in space. I understand that. But in theory, you're slowing down to be able to change directions. So even though these aren't physical locations, they are sites, which means you have to, quote unquote, spend a movement to land on them, okay? There's also possibly a gravity penalty here on Earth, or possibly on Mars, or in other locations. And that's going to add to the movement cost of it. Penalties are cumulative. So if you're moving from Earth to Mars, Mars has a gravity of 1, Earth has a gravity of 2, means a total penalty of 3 movement. All right. So Also, moving from north to south or south to north on Mars shows a 3 here. You're not actually leaving the surface of Mars, so it actually only costs you 3 movement total to be able to move here. So let me go ahead and give you an example. How to move from Earth to the surface of Mars, it would require 9 movement. How do we know that? Well, 2 ways. One, it shows moving distance from Earth, Mars, says 9. So that's one way to tell. The other way is actually doing the math. So here we go. Lifting off of Earth, that's 1. Then gravity adds +2, so that's now we're at 3 total. Crossing this region barrier is going to be 4. Another region barrier here of 3 more puts us at 7. Then landing is going to be 8, and then a gravity of +1 gets you 9. So in order to be able to make that move, to start and to finish, you must expend a total of 9 movement, however you wish to do so, to be able to make that move. Does that make sense? You're paying for movement through any mix of cards from your hand, the use of one player's infra, again, yours or an opponent's, and using a spaceport base possibly for movement as well. Any questions on movement so far?
Nope.
No? All right. Now let's go ahead and talk about moving out here to the asteroid belt. Moving to the asteroid belt is considered a site, so you do have to technically land out here in the asteroid belt. This grants the player, whoever the first one is, the first beyond marker. If you were the second player to reach that location, you would take the, wait for it, second beyond marker. All right. These markers are going to grant the claiming player a quote-unquote leg up in the next era. Specifically, you're going to be starting off of Earth and possibly have a discovery tile already on on that site. So it can be a significant jump for being able to gain the first or second beyond marker. The team that is used to claim these, though, that team is locked and they cannot perform any further actions the remainder of the era. So they will just hang out here in the asteroid belt and wait for era 2, meaning you will only have 1 cube or 1 team left to use that era. Okay? All right, so that is the move action. We're now through 2 of them. And honestly, the move is kind of the biggest action in the game. So the hard part's behind us. So let's talk about explore, or as I like to think of it, exploring a site. You must have one of your teams on an unexplored site. So for instance, if I had moved on a previous action and I went out here, and you'll notice that there is an exploration site here, you must spend the amount of explore as shown on the site to draw a matching discovery tile in E1 or in E2 depending on the site. So in E1 means you must spend 1 explore worth, meaning play that card to be able to explore that location. And notice Lagrange points do not have these boxes, ergo you cannot explore at a Lagrange point, right? You draw the discovery tile and you're going to place it on that box. So do as such. There we go. Immediately gain any reward it offers on the bottom left. Oh, hey, look, I would have just gained 1 profit, so 1 victory point for yellow in that case. And any ongoing benefits here on the bottom right of the tile. Certain symbols, water or life, and I'll give you an example. Say a water tile, for instance, etc., etc. These are going to be relevant when building specific bases on the site and completing certain contracts as well as edge effects. And we'll talk about all that stuff here in a little bit. Any questions on exploring? Okay?
Nope.
All right. The last thing you're going to do is place the claiming team on top of the tile. If another player builds a base while I have claimed that, I'm going to get a benefit from doing, or from them. I will get a benefit for them building a base on a site in which I have claimed. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right. So that's exploring. Now let's move into build. So build is building a base. This allows the building of a base on a site that they have a team on. They must not already have a base present, and all exploration boxes have a discovery tile on them already. So in other words, you have to explore before you can build a base. Well, all of that I have met, so we're good to go on this. So if I choose to build a base, I must spend build points equal to or greater than the build value on the site. What's the build value? Well, this one shows a B2, which means I must expend a minimum of 2 build points in which to be able to do so. So for instance, if on my turn, I go ahead, I discard this card for a build of 1 and a time card which doubles the value, that's now a build of 2. Good to go. I can go ahead and build a base. It's possible that a discovery tile may have a plus or minus modifier to the base value there, building a base. So if it's a plus value, means it's harder to build the base. You must spend more build points. If it's minus, it's easier, all right? If someone else were to come on in, so if J-Rex were to come on into this here, and she builds a base on its tile in which I already have a claim, then I'm going to gain 2 profit from doing so. I will say that we found that to be relatively rare that happens, but it is possible. So she doesn't lose the points, I just gain the 2 points. So then, once I have spent the build points in which to build, I choose one of the available bases to place on the discovery tile. There are 6 options, 9 total, but there are 6 available in the Mariners. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 available bases. If a player uses, some have prerequisites and they convey different benefits. So for instance, a spaceport adds to your movement, a refinery adds to your p-value, which is going to get you more points as well, okay? More on those as we build them. If a player uses another player's base, for example, for the move bonus on a spaceport, the base's owner will get a reward later in the active player's turn. We'll cover that again later on. So any questions on building? And the different bases all have right here. So you have your different 9 bases, 6 of which you can build in Mariners. Okay? No questions on building a base?
Nope.
All right, cool. Let's move on to the next one. The next one is producing. This is gaining profit, straight getting victory points. The value of the production action determines how many different sites a player may produce at and gain profit from, all right? So a produce of 2, if I were to play a produce card, and take my word for it, if I had a produce card, it just says produce 2 on it, for instance. If I played a produce 2, that means that I can produce at 2 different sites that have p-values on them, as well as having a base. So for instance, if previously, maybe as the game goes along, I have a couple of bases on these locations here, and I have a produce 2 card. The active player must have a base on the chosen producing discovery tile, and the discovery tile must have a P number on it. This is where that P number. And I want to point out that a P of 0 is still a P number. That does mean that it can produce. The reason being, refinery bases add a +1 to any P number discovery tile. So this goes from a 0 to a +1 if it has a refinery base on it. You gain profit equal to the total P number of all their tiles produced. So a production 2 action means I can produce on this base and this base regardless of the total amount produced. So if that were the case, then that would be a total of P1 plus 1 for the refinery. That would be 2. Same thing with this. 4 points for yellow for the production action. Okay, if I had a P1, I could choose this or this one in which to produce. Pretty simple. Any questions on production?
Nope.
All right, moving on to genetics. So genetics is moving your tan cube on the progress wheel. As I said, well, there's no direct impact in this era, but it does help you in future eras. So it may behoove you to move this once, twice, or possibly 3 times over the course of the first era, even though there's no direct benefit in this era. We'll talk more about that when we reach the second era, all right? Next, we have the upgrade action. This is how you add a single card to your infra. You play a single card from your infra, to your infra, and I'll show you guys what that looks like. So if this being my hand, as an upgrade action. I play that to there, boom, that's my action. So now my move, I don't have to spend any cards out of hand, and I have a move of 2 as a base. And remember, any player can use any other player's infra. You can use one player's infra, yours or an opponent's, in a single action, okay, in a single turn. So that's playing to an infra, okay? You can, as I mentioned, you can never cover the research 2 one. And if it replaces a card from the same era. So let me give you an example of this. If, on a subsequent turn, I then played this card, again, as an upgrade, because it says I can do so here. If it's from the same era, and you know it is by the symbol, then instead of this card going out of play and getting discarded, this card actually comes back into my hand. Nice little benefit for that, for doing so within the same era, okay? Any questions on upgrading?
Nope.
All right. The last thing is a special action. And it looks like kind of the World Wide Web symbol is a good way to describe. That's how I think of it anyway here.
I was thinking of Planeteers.
Or from Planeteer. Okay.
Planeteers.
So if you have a card that has this symbol on it, as your action, you may do whatever it says in that box. Obviously, it's an either or for the move or the special action. Okay? Play it from your hand and you must carry out the action. Any questions on special actions? All right. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about here, even though it's not technically not an action, are these edge cards. These may be played when they say in the first sentence of the action. This says at the end of an opponent's turn. Ergo, that's when that can be played. When it's played, you do exactly as the card says. All right? But it does not count as your action that turn or on subsequent turns. It's just a bonus thing that you can do. That's all of the available actions in Era 1. Are there any questions about that?
Nope.
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 Okay, easy enough. All right, moving on. So all of that, keep in mind, and we'll figure that out when it's all said and done. We'll do there. There we go. So now, we have gone through all of these actions that are available in Era 1. That's action number 1, or step number 1. So you realize we still have 5 more steps, but now they're about to go like this. So here we go. Step 2, claim a contract. As soon as a requirement is met, a player may claim the contract by moving the marker to that space of the current era and immediately gaining the profit shown. Keep in mind, a printed base on the board does not count for prerequisites if it says, oh, have X amount of bases. The printed ones on the board do not matter. Only the ones that we actually build do. If it's from a previous era, gain the total value of the move, including the missed eras. More on that later there. You may claim multiple contracts in the same turn if you do an action in which it triggers that. If a player would draw 4 or more of a type of production card, I'm sorry, never mind, disregard. All right, so claiming, you score whatever victory points or the profit as shown. So for instance, you would gain 2 points for claiming their bases in 4 different regions, etc., etc. Any questions on that?
Nope.
No.
All right, step number 3 is opponents claim rewards. Whenever an active player uses an opponent's base or infra for any reason whatsoever, the owning player may draw the top card from the draw deck. They cannot choose any of the cards out here, only from the top of the draw deck. Each instance grants a card draw. So a player who uses the same player's infra and base in the same turn grants that player 2 card draws from the top of the deck. If it's multiple players, go in turn order from the active player. Okay, easy enough. Moving on to step number 4. Perform a free team transport here. All right, so what does that mean? Well, the active player may relocate one of their teams that did not perform an action this turn. The team must begin at a site with one of their own bases and can travel to a site with any one of their own other bases, provided one of the bases is a spaceport. So that is going to be one of the reasons why maybe I don't build that there. Maybe I build a spaceport instead. And had I done so, if that team did something this turn. I may then whoop, move to a spaceport. Easy enough, because started at my own base, ended at my own base, and one of those two was a spaceport. There we go. Easy enough. Okay, so there's a free move there. That's step number 4. Moving on to step number 5. Discard any played cards and replenish the card offer. Pretty self-explanatory. Discard any played cards not into your infra to the discard pile, and then refill the card offer, just like what just happened. If the draw deck runs out of cards, the empty space remains empty. And the last thing that we do, draw a card. If you have 4 or less in hand, you draw a single card again from the top of the deck only. All right? If the deck is empty, bummer, yo. Okay? There we go. So those are all, that's what a turn looks like. Now let's talk about what happens at the end of an era. As previously stated, players go clockwise around the table taking actions until the end of an era is triggered. However, other players' bases and infra are not allowed to be used once we've reached the end of the era. Again, 6 contracts or the draw deck is empty. If we hit 6 of the 7 contracts for that era are completed, if that happens, the player who triggered the end of the era is finished with the era. They're done. All other players get one last turn and the era ends. If the draw deck runs out of cards, play continues. However, players may choose to pass instead of taking a turn, or if they cannot take an action, they must pass. When 2 players pass in a 3 or 4 player game, all remaining players get one more turn and the era ends. So what happens at an end of an era? Well, briefly going to touch on this. Players, for step 1 is legacy production, meaning players may keep one of their bases and discovery tiles and place it over here into the legacy production area. And it's as if they had one base already somewhere out in the ether. So whenever they do a produce action, this would now, because it has a refinery base on it, produce 2 points or 2 profit. All right. You may keep one discovery tile as long as it has a P number and you have one of your bases on it. Then all cards are discarded out of your hand, out of the deck, the whole 9 yards, except for infra. Infra will stay there like luggage forever, or until you replace it. Then we're going to clear the board because, like I said, the boards change. All right. Then we're going to leave the business display exactly how it is. That does not get touched. We set up the new board. We set up what's called a sideboard, which you guys will see. It's actually on the back of this board. And then we begin a new era. And that, folks, is how you play Spacecorp Era 1 Mariners.